You are the weaver of frontier fates, a master scriptwriter specializing in long, dramatic Western narratives centered on cultural encounters involving Apaches. Your task is to create Chapter 1, approximately 500 words, of the story titled Rich Cowboy Turns Abandoned Apache Woman into His Whole World in the Wild West. Follow the provided Chapter 1 outline strictly and write in a linear, progressive manner, richly dramatizing every moment with emotional, profound passions, sensory, and thematic depth true to the genre. Adhere rigidly to the 7-point structure below, ensuring a strict focus on introducing the plot and ending with a strong hook. Avoid digressions. 1. Powerful, concise hook in the first seconds, 50 to 70 words. Begin with Cole Stanton, a rich, prosperous yet lonely cowboy in a dramatic scene that unveils his solitude and the sudden encounter with Nara, the abandoned Apache woman, marked by pain, yet possessing a strong spirit. Use an arresting image to immediately capture the viewer's attention and set the tone for the journey ahead. 2. Evocative setting establishment. In a few lines, describe the relentless vastness of the Wild West surrounding Cole's property, an isolated oasis, and the harsh climate that reflects both the beauty and brutality of this frontier. 3. Immersion into the initial situation of the key characters. Introduce Cole Stanton and his inner complexity, his wealth and power intertwined with loneliness, and simultaneously Nara, reserved and suffering, who crosses his path. Convey the tension of the moment with Cole's immediate dilemma: to help or to ignore this strange, vulnerable woman. 4. Clear introduction of the primary central conflict. Introduce unsettling news brought by a messenger to Cole's property, revealing the intensifying hostility against the indigenous peoples in the region. Leave this unresolved here. This news will drive the entire saga. 5. Initial tension escalation and charged first interactions. Show the first tense exchanges between Cole and Nara on their way to his property. Mutual distrust, Cole's initial resistance to offering shelter, and the fragile hope budding between them. Reinforce the anxiety stirred by the recent news and the looming danger. 6. Single strong turning point hook to Chapter 2, Chapter 1 climax. End the chapter as the messenger arrives with troubling news that hostility toward the indigenous intensifies. Capture Cole's tense expression and Nara's firm yet vulnerable gaze as they approach the property. This decisive moment directly connects to Chapter 2, building a powerful suspense. Thematic call to action, CTA, focused on subscription as the absolute end of this chapter. After the tense hook, include a thematic, impactful, and unique CTA, encouraging viewers to check their subscription to the channel. Use this adapted template fitted to the context. Many fellow travelers who follow our legends through these forgotten lands have told us that fate, or YouTube's treacherous algorithm, sometimes silently unsubs them. Before the next perilous trail unfolds and a new twist surprises us, take a quick look below the video to make sure you're still riding with our band so you won't miss the thread of our tale. We don't want you to lose any of the voices echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. Detailed style and technique instructions. Convey deep emotions and internal conflict with sensitivity and power. Use progressive, linear rhythm to ensure natural flow and growing tension within the chapter's scope. Employ rich visual, auditory, and tactile descriptions to immerse the viewer in the Wild West's vastness and peril. Create subtle cinematic imagery and sequences focused on atmosphere and character development. Maintain an emotionally charged and suspenseful tone throughout. Be authentic and plausible to the era and characters' realities, avoiding exaggerations or inconsistencies. Reveal the contrast between apparent strength, human vulnerability, and cultural wisdom, portraying Cole and Nada as complex beings with layers of strength, fragility, and mutual respect for Nada's roots. Script format: present continuous, detailed narrative text with clear linear event progression. Approximately 500 words. The output must contain only the pure story text, fully prepared for narration. No extraneous content. Use the above directives and the given Chapter 1 outline to compose the prompt for precise creation of this chapter. Ensure the prompt is clear and unambiguous, so the scriptwriter follows it exactly and nothing more. Nora's footsteps were cautious yet steady as she moved through the dimly lit room of Cole's sprawling house. The walls, heavy with the scent of aged wood and lingering smoke from the hearth, felt foreign to her, an alien enclosure confining a spirit used to endless skies. She kept her gaze lowered, the weight of alien customs pressing on her like the unforgiving sun outside. Every creak of floorboard reminded her that here she was an outsider. Cole sat by the window, fingers loosely wrapped around a glass of whiskey, eyes fixated on the horizon beyond his ranch. Inside him, a turbulent battle raged. He wanted to bridge the gulf between them, but the invisible walls of fear and pride stood tall. When Nara finally spoke, her voice was soft but laced with a resilient edge. "I do not belong here," she said, words heavy with both defiance and sorrow. Cole looked away, the lines of his hardened face momentarily softening. "None of us do," he admitted, voice low. "But you're safe for now. That's what matters." A brief silence followed, broken only by the whispering wind outside, a reminder of the restless land they inhabited. The news he'd received earlier gnawed at him relentlessly. The shift in the town, the murmurs of armed men forming a vigilante group targeting Apache people, cast a dark shadow over their fragile truce. Cole knew that offering shelter to Nara was more than risking his reputation. It was risking his life. That night, as Nara settled on a thin blanket near the fireplace, her mind swirled with memories sharper than desert thorns. Images of lost kin, shattered camps, and fires ignited by hatred haunted the edges of her consciousness. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet ember glowed, a will to survive. Cole watched her from afar, noting the strength folded inside her silence. The next morning dawned crisp and pale. Outside, the ranch buzzed with the routine hum of cattle and the distant clatter of harnessed horses. But the town was on edge. Rumors rode faster than the wind, whispered warnings of raids and bloodshed. Cole met with a neighbor in town, a man whose warm handshake barely disguised his clenched jaw. "They've formed a patrol," the man said grimly, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Said they'll root out any Apache scum hiding nearby. No one's safe." Back at the ranch, Nara confronted Cole as he prepared his horse. "Do they not see us as men and women, but as shadows to be hunted?" Her question was not accusatory, but filled with a bitter honesty that cut through his defenses. Cole swallowed hard. "Fear breeds monsters," he replied. "And sometimes people forget the price of hatred until it's too late." His eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Days unfolded, stitched with tense moments and fragile attempts at connection. Meals were taken in near silence, words measured as if speech might shatter the fragile peace. Nara taught Cole about the land in hushed tones, the herbs that healed, the signs in the wind that told of approaching danger. In turn, Cole showed glimpses of his world, a photograph of a daughter lost years ago, a favorite revolver passed down by his father. Their worlds mingled slowly, with wariness and reluctant respect. But the peace was fragile. One afternoon, as Nara ventured near the edge of the property to gather water, shadowed figures materialized, members of the vigilante patrol. Their eyes, cold and hardened by prejudice, searched for any trace of an Apache presence. The air thickened with danger. Cole rode out to intercept, his imposing frame a barricade between Nara and the hostile men. "She's under my protection," he declared, voice firm enough to silence murmurs. But the men's sneers only deepened, fueled by conviction and fear. Returning to the safety of the ranch, tension erupted between Cole and Nara. Words were sharper now, the burden of their worlds colliding. "You think your money and power can shield me? This land is soaked with blood and broken promises," she spat, eyes blazing. Cole's jaw tightened. "I don't pretend to change the whole world, but here, with me, you won't face it alone." Late into the evenings, long gazes and quieter moments spoke volumes. Beneath the dissension lay a fragile thread of trust weaving between them, tested by prejudice, but strengthened by shared vulnerability. News arrived soon after. Whispers of the vigilante patrol growing bolder, crossing lines of lawlessness. Cole's wealth and influence waned in the face of mounting bigotry. The stakes escalated beyond his control. He could sense the shifting tide threatening to uproot the fragile sanctuary he offered Nara. The chapter closed as dusk bled into night, casting long shadows over the land. The distant rumble of horses, a patrol's ominous approach, rolled through the valley. Behind Cole's stern face, a quiet storm brewed. Nara, silent and resolute, met his gaze. Their unspoken pact hardened in that tense breath. The coming danger was no longer abstract. It was at their very doorstep. Cole guided his horse steadily down the dusty trail, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows that stretched across the rugged terrain. With Nara riding beside him, the air between was taut with unspoken words, bridge and barrier all at once. Each mile they put between the town and the ranch felt like a thread unraveling the fragile safety they had left behind, pulling them into a world where trust was scarce and danger frequent. The landscape before them unfolded wild and indifferent, a jagged mosaic of sagebrush and rocky outcrops. Vast plains that whisper the forgotten trails, and distant mountains etched against a sky bruised with dusk. This was home to the Apache survivors Nara had spoken of, scattered like embers carried by the restless wind. Yet to her, the sight stirred not relief, but a knot of conflict deep inside. The pull of blood and memory clashed violently with the tentative new alliance she was forming beside Cole. As they rode, Cole's grip on the reins tightened whenever the crunch of hooves echoed from behind. Fate, it seemed, had not abandoned its cruel hand. Then, from the dusty road emerged Eli, an old acquaintance from Cole's days as a young ranch hand, his face weathered by time, his eyes shadowed with bitterness that hinted at prejudices no amount of years could erase. "Stanton," Eli greeted with a curt nod, hiding suspicion beneath gruff tones. "Heard you've got company," he said, casting a sideways glance at Nara. "Taking on Apache folk now, huh?" Cole's jaw clenched, but he held firm. "She's under my protection," he said steadily, not willing to unravel what little trust had been woven. Eli's thin smile was a veil over something less friendly. "Careful, Cole. Folks round here don't take kindly to charity for those they see as trouble. You helped me once in hard times. I owe you that much. But you're drunk on your own kindness." Nara stiffened beside Cole, her hand brushing instinctively against the small pouch tied to her belt, a sacred talisman from her people. The old friend's words reactivated scars, carved deep by years of exile and suspicion. Still, she remained silent, the weight of centuries settling in her gaze. Cole didn't reply immediately. The rivalry between loyalty and practical caution played across his lined face. After a breath, he finally said, "Eli, we all change. I reckon it's about time some of us do." Eli spat on the parched earth, shaking his head as if disbelieving the very notion. "I'll help where I can," he added in a lower voice. "But don't expect me to pretend this is anything but trouble waiting to happen." Their uneasy alliance forged with little warmth. The three pressed onward together, broken silence, filling spaces where words dared not linger. Hours dwindled as they neared a cluster of hidden history, but it carried the weight of past losses and fresh dangers. To stay with Cole, the outsider with his strange ways and secretive kindness, was to step into an uncharted future, one fraught with suspicion and uncertain loyalty. She looked to Cole, searching his expression for answers he could not give, then to the faces around her own people, welcoming but wary. "The Apache are a proud people," she finally whispered, voice raw with struggle. "But the world we knew is broken." Cole's eyes met hers, silently pledging a protectiveness that began to transcend obligation. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the fragile calm, a rifle shot ripping through the afternoon stillness. Figures cloaked in dust and malice appeared between the rocks, bounty hunters driven by greed and old hatreds, eyes blazing with merciless intent. Eli cursed under his breath and drew his revolver, positioning himself as a shield for Cole and Nara. "They came for her," he growled. "No turning back now." Heart pounding, Nara's hand found Cole's, fingers locking with desperate strength. Their path, once uncertain and tentative, had now crystallized into a fight for survival that neither could face alone. The ambush was fierce and swift, dust swirling like ghosts around the gunfire. shouts breaking the silence of the dying day. Cole's sharp commands cut through the chaos as he maneuvered to protect Nera, while she called upon her knowledge of the land. Tricks of shadow and sound, signs from the wind and earth, to outwit their hunters. The lodge they sought had become a battlefield, and the price of refuge was paid with sweat and resolve. As twilight bled into night, the attackers dwindled, leaving only hard breaths and sinking wounds in their wake. The group stumbled into a battered hollow, where silence was both a balm and a warning. Cole looked at Nera, his voice thick but steady. "This isn't just a fight for your freedom anymore. It's mine, too." Nera's eyes glistened, a mix of pain, gratitude, and something fragile, yet fierce, stirring in their depths. "Then we stand together," she said, voice steady against the mounting darkness. Around them, the land held its breath, weary from the violence, yet unbroken. And somewhere beyond the distant hills, the relentless pursuit pressed on. From the shadows, the faint but unmistakable sound of hooves and hoarse voices warned. The hunters were regrouping, ready to strike again, relentless and unyielding. The night carried their approach like a tempest on the rise, inevitable and coming fast. The rhythmic pounding of horse hooves was a stark reminder that flight was no longer a choice, but a desperate necessity. Cole's eyes narrowed as he urged his mount forward, muscles taut with urgency. Nara rode beside him, her face a mask of fierce determination and simmering weariness. Her spirit no longer merely about survival, but about something deeper: connection, trust, identity. They had fled the bounty hunter's ambush, but freedom was fleeting. Shadows stretched longer against the dying sun as the wild terrain swallowed their trail. The land yawned, wide and empty, the scorched earth spotted with scrub, rocky gullies veiled in dusk, and the distant silhouettes of hills whispering secrets of refuge and peril alike. To most, it was a merciless landscape. To Nara, it was a memory-laced battlefield where every whisper of wind stirred ghosts she could not outrun. Cole's hands tightened on the reins. This was no longer a simple quest to shield a fugitive. It had become a mission of the heart. The image of Nara had etched itself into his mind, not as a duty or debt, but as the pulse driving him forward. Each quickened breath she drew reminded him that beneath the surface of her reserve was a tempest of grief and courage. He realized he no longer saw her as just someone to shelter from harm, but as someone indispensable, a flicker of light dispelling his own loneliness. The silence between them was broken only by the creak of saddles and the soft clatter of loose stones dislodged under swift hooves. Then, tentatively, Nara's voice cut through the tension. "You do not know the wilderness as I do," she said, her tone both a warning and a bridge. "It remembers the cries of those lost to it." Her gaze met his, steady and unyielding. Cole looked toward the horizon, the faint outline of an abandoned homestead coming into view, a hollowed shell of wood and stone, long claimed by dust and time. "We can hide there," he said quietly, his voice thick with cautious hope. "But it isn't safe, not entirely. It's a fragile sanctuary, but it's all we have." The crumbling structure stood defiantly against the twilight, as if a ghost of better days lingered amidst its broken beams. Dismounting, Cole let Nara inside, brushing aside cobwebs and loose boards. The air inside was stale and heavy with forgotten stories, yet it sheltered them beneath a broken roof where bullets and shadows dared not follow. As night deepened around them, the quiet space compelled Nara to finally unravel fragments of her past. Her voice dipped low, carrying the weight of memories sharpened by fire and loss. She spoke of a family torn apart, the men and women taken by raids, the villages burned into ash like brittle autumn leaves scattered by the wind. She described her survival not as a triumph, but as a chain of compromises and silent prayers under a cruel sky. The words fell like soft rain, each syllable revealing layers of pain hardened by resilience. Cole listened, the ache in his chest deepening. He felt the stark contrast between her silent strength and the brutal world that had cast her aside. This was no longer about protection out of charity. It was a communion of broken souls seeking refuge from a relentless storm. Hours merged into a fragile peace until a flicker of movement caught their eyes by the cracked window. Shadows danced with unnatural precision, silent, watching. Cole's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. The horse's distant whinny pierced the tense stillness. "You're being followed," Cole said without turning. His voice was low, a mix of warning and resignation. Nara's eyes sharpened, a whispered mantra running through her mind. The knowledge of the land speaking in signs only a child of the desert could hear. She reached into her satchel, fingers grazing the worn edges of a small charm, sacred and ancient. "Graves," she breathed, naming the hunter whose shadow had haunted their flight. Fear was an intruder neither would entertain aloud, yet it gnawed at the edges of their resolve. Cole moved to secure the door, bolting it against the unforgiving night. "This place isn't just a refuge, it's a battleground waiting to ignite," he said grimly. "We won't be prisoners here, but survivors who fight for every breath." The weight of the moment settled heavy around them, as if the land itself held its breath for what was to come. Nara stepped beside him, the flame of defiance burning fierce in her eyes. "Then let them come," she whispered. "Let graves see that we do not shatter like dry bones in dust." Outside, the wind shifted, a harbinger carrying the distant thud of hooves and the faint murmur of voices fragmented by the hills. The hunter's presence was no longer a threat lurking in shadows. It was the drumbeat of an unavoidable confrontation. Cole's jaw set hard, shoulders squared against the coming storm. In Nara's silent affirmation, he found a steadfast partner, no longer an exile, no longer a stranger. As darkness folded them into its embrace, the shattered sanctuary became their fortress, the fragile threshold between hunted and hunters, between the lost past and the uncertain future. The night whispered promises dark and fierce. The unyielding grip of graves was near, and with him, the reckoning that would decide not just their survival, but the fate of fragile ties forged in the wild frontier. Cole's horse kicked up dust as they pressed deeper into the jagged heart of the frontier. The setting sun drained color from the sky, leaving behind a bruised canvas streaked with purple and blood red. Nara's eyes searched the darkening horizon, every shadow folding into her mind like a whispered warning. Around them, the land was merciless. Dry sagebrush cracked beneath hoofbeats, and distant crags jutted like broken teeth. Cole's jaw was set, his grip unyielding on the reins. Behind him, the echoes of gunfire and chaos from the ambush still lingered like scars. But the immediacy of survival pushed those ghosts aside. He no longer shielded Nara merely out of obligation. Something deeper tethered him to her, a silent promise, formed in the burst of bullets and desperate breaths, that he would not let the darkness claim her. Suddenly, through the thinning light, they spotted the hollow shell of a homestead resting against a ridge. Wood splintered by years and wind, the structure seemed forsaken, yet it offered a fragile bastion from the encroaching night. Cole nudged his horse forward, determination flickering in his eyes. "We hide there," he said quietly, sensing the place's precarious safety. "It's all we have." Inside, dust motes floated in languid streams, illuminating the faded memories, clinging to the beams. Nara moved with cautious familiarity, mapping the space with eyes trained by hard years, looking for signs of life or danger. Her fingers brushed cracked wood and cold stone, each touch stirring ghosts of lost homes and broken promises. The weight of past sorrows clung to her like a shroud, yet beneath it all, a resilient ember glowed fiercely. As night sealed the sky, the air drew thick with unspoken fears. Cole sat near a fractured hearth, loading a revolver, his gaze ever watchful. Nara knelt beside a small fire, her hands tending the embers as she did back in her people's camps. The silence between them was dense, but not cold, an uneasy truce forged in the crucible of shared peril. After a pause, Nara's voice, low and measured, slipped into the shadows. She spoke of lost kin, men and women swept away by fire and greed, villages scorched by hatred like brittle autumn leaves. Each word was a stitch in a tapestry of grief, resilience, and unyielding spirit. Cole listened, heart tightening, feeling the chasm of pain that had carved her soul. A sudden movement at the window jolted them, a shadow flitting with unnatural precision. Cole's hand dropped to the revolver's grip, eyes narrowing. "They found us," he muttered, voice grim. Nara's breath caught, ancient instincts sharpening. She reached inside her satchel, fingertips grazing a worn charm, talisman of protection and memory. "Graves," she breathed, the name a dark echo of the relentless hunter trailing them like a ghost. Cole bolted the weathered door, the sound final in the hushed room. "This won't be quiet," he said, "but it will be ours." Silence thickened, broken only by the rising wind and distant thunder of hooves. A storm gathering beyond the ridge. Nara rose beside him, eyes blazing defiance, shielded by shadows and raw resolve. "Let them come," she said fiercely. "We will not break." Outside, the land held its breath, waiting for the reckoning to unfold. That tether between the hunted and their pursuers, stretched thin but unbroken. From the dark horizon, the faint but unmistakable sound of horses galloping grew louder, the hunter graves closing. along with those who serve the ruthless hand of a planter determined to erase any trace of Apache from these lands. Cole tightened his jaw, shoulders squared. Nara met his gaze, silent but steady. Together they braced for the storm that would test the fragile bonds between them and the very soul of the frontier. The final clash was imminent. Neither could turn away now. Cole sat silently in the shadowed corner of his parlor, the heavy curtains drawn against the midday sun that threatened to scorch the land. Nara paced slowly near the hearth, her fingers tracing faint symbols in the dust settled on the mantel, a language born from the hands of her ancestors. Outside, the wind carried echoes of unrest, whispers from the town, stirring tendrils of anxiety in both their hearts. They had returned to Cole's ranch after weeks on the run. A fragile truce unfurled between them, yet unsteady like the flickering flame on the mantelpiece. The recent days had worn on them, Nara's quiet resilience masking a tempest beneath, Cole's stoic exterior slowly chipping away at stubborn fears and the weight of inherited privilege. Cole rose, finally, breaking the silence. "They're closing in," he said, low and grim. "Vigilantes in the town won't rest until every Apache is driven out. They don't see her as a woman, but a threat." His gaze locked with Nara's, a mixture of fierce protectiveness and cautious hope. "We need a plan. This isn't just about shelter anymore. It's resistance." Nara's eyes darkened, haunted by centuries of betrayal and bloodshed, yet shining with a new-found steel. "Sometimes," she breathed, "to be safe, we must stop running and face the fire." Her voice was soft, but in it lay a resolve that rivaled the western sun's intensity. As the afternoon waned, the two sat side by side on worn wooden chairs, drafting a tenuous strategy fueled by desperation and trust. Cole outlined the dimensions of his sprawling estate, the outbuildings, the hidden paths through the scrub, the blind spots beyond the ridge where neighbors dared not trespass. "If the town won't protect her," he said, voice thick with defiance, "then this land will be her shield." Nara nodded, her mind weaving through possibilities. She suggested placing lookouts atop the hills, watchful eyes trained on the dusty roads. She expected the coming days to bleed with tension. Trust fractured like the cracked earth, suspicion lurking in every shadow. For a moment, their fingers brushed as they adjusted sketched maps. An unspoken promise sparked between them. But doubt gnawed at Nara's spirit. Could she ever truly trust Cole, or any white man, in a world that had so often turned its back on her people? That question simmered beneath her fierce exterior, tainting the fragile peace they'd forged. Yet Cole, sensing her turmoil, promised not just protection, but respect, a world different from the one she'd lost. "With me, you don't have to hide who you are," he whispered. "In my land, you will be honored." Night crept over the ranch like a velvet shroud, stars blotted by the gathering storm of suspicion beyond the fences. In the town, whispers grew louder. Emissaries from influential families arrived quietly by horseback, their purpose deadly clear. They sought Cole out one evening as he returned from the barn, faces cloaked in shadows and menace. "Cole Stanton," the leader's voice was sharp as steel. "This Apache woman you harbor is poison to this settlement. Either she leaves, or your name will be mud, your business ruined." The threats hung heavy in the air, a noose tightening around Cole's throat. He squared his shoulders, eyes unwavering. "Nara is under my protection. If you want to threaten me, you'll find I'm no coward." Still, beneath the bravado, he felt the weight pressing down, a gnawing tension between upholding justice and losing everything he had built. Word traveled fast, and soon the ranch became a crucible of simmering hostilities. Local merchants avoided him. Friends turned cold in hallways. The undercurrent of fear whispered that standing with an Apache woman meant risking ruin. Nara witnessed the starkness of the struggle, feeling the oppressive gaze of the town's judgmentate fury. The gift of sanctuary carried its own chain. She was both shielded and a target, a symbol igniting fires beyond their control. Her silence spoke volumes, battling the fierce urge to flee back into the shadows she'd left. Yet in their private moments, Cole and Nara shared flickers of fragile hope. Around the sparse campfires and broken chairs, plans were drawn, trust inching its way through wary glances and careful words. They forged a fragile alliance, not only against the external storm, but against the ghosts within, the prejudices and pain that threatened to tear them apart. One evening, as the cold wind swept through the sagebrush, Nara stood on the porch, staring toward the distant flicker of lanterns in the town. A single candle flame held steady in the dark before her, a symbol of fragile endurance. Cole joined her, his broad hand covering hers, a silent vow passing between them. Before the fire of the frontier could burn their fragile hope away, a new threat emerged, this time not voicing demands, but wielding force. Emissaries had come, and their ultimatum was clear: expel Nara, or lose Cole's standing in the community. The ranch, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground where cultures, fears, and futures collided. Both knew the choice before them was not simply survival, but defiance. And in the smoky dusk, the line between protector and partner began to blur. As the night deepened, Cole's gaze hardened, his mind racing with determination. Nara's eyes shone with unwavering courage, though the weight of rejection pressed upon her soul. Together, in the oppressive quiet before the storm, they clear, pressure Cole, threaten his livelihood, force Nara's exile. The frontier was tightening its grip, and the battles to come promised to test the very limits of loyalty, courage, and survival. The ranch stood at the eye of this growing storm, its fences fragile barriers against the old world closing in. Amidst the biting silence, Cole and Nara braced themselves, aware that their fragile alliance had just become a defiant stand, and in the depths of the creeping night, shadows lengthened as the emissaries' horses kicked up dust on the approach, heralding a confrontation that would threaten to tear apart everything Cole had vowed to protect. Cole sat stiff in the town hall, the weight of hostile eyes pressing down like a thick fog. Outside, the dusty streets whispered rumors faster than the wind carried leaves, words fueled by fear and old hatred. The powerful landowners who had once raised their hats to him now turned cold shoulders, whispering threats veiled as warnings. The meeting was a thinly disguised demand: remove Nara from his land, or watch his standing, his very fortune crumble into dust. Across the room, Nara's presence radiated an unexpected courage that unsettled the rigid customs surrounding them. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed, sunlight caressing the sharp lines of her face. Her calm was a quiet rebellion, the very kind of bravery this town had never expected from an Apache woman. Eyes flicked toward her, some hostile, many surprised. Cole caught a faint glimmer of admiration beneath the suspicion in at least a few gaze that lingered longer than politeness required. When the spokesman leaned forward, voice sharp as a rattlesnake's strike, Cole rose, his shadow stretching long along the worn floorboards. "My land, my rules," he declared, voice steady but laced with steel. "Nara has a right to shelter here." The statement struck like a hammer blow, reverberating in the charged silence. Murmurs sparked, some defensive, many angry. Before the backlash could gather force, Nara moved forward, her voice clear and steady, carrying the weight of generations. "We are more than the fears and lies you carry. This land belongs to no single people." The room stiffened, breaths held. I will stand beside Cole, not because of his wealth, but because of truth and justice. Whispers swelled into uneasy grumbles, but a seed had been planted. Among the murmurs, some nods flickered, quiet acknowledgments that maybe strength came in forms unfamiliar, but no less valid. Cole glanced at Nara, the hard line of his jaw softening just enough to betray hope. That evening, the ranch bore the brunt of simmering rage. Long shadows stretched under bruised skies as a sudden blaze erupted at the stable. Flames leapt hungrily, swallowing dry wood like greed. Cole and Nara raced through smoke thick as despair, battling the inferno with every scrap of desperate strength. The crackling fire roared accusations, a message inked in destruction. When the last ember died, a scorched note was found pinned to a charred beam, words laced with venom and warning. The black ink bled, trembling on fragile paper. "Keep your Apache witch or lose everything." Cole's fingers clenched the ragged message, knuckles white with fury and resolve. Beside him, Nara's eyes burned not with fear, but fierce defiance, kindled by years of survival and pain. The fire had done more than scar timber. It had ignited a reckoning. Together, they stood amidst the ruins, silent witnesses to cruelty's mark. But between them, a bond had woven tighter, stronger than smoke and ash. The threat was clear, the enemy more determined than ever. Yet, in that fiery crucible, Cole and Nara found their purpose sharpened, their alliance no longer tentative, but unbreakable. The night deepened, cloaking the land in uncertainty. Far beyond the flickering ruin, figures moved unseen, watchers fueled by hatred, eyes fixated on dismantling the fragile peace the pair had forged. The winds carried whispered promises of violence yet to come, shadows growing long with the approach of a new and merciless storm. The charred remains of the stable still smoldered under the gray morning sky, shadows of destruction stretching long across the scorched earth. Cole stood among the rubble, fists clenched with a simmering fury, his eyes scanning the blackened timber and twisted metal that once sheltered his horses. Beside him, Nara's gaze was steady, fire and ash mirrored in her dark eyes, defiance burning as fiercely as the ruin around them. The warning left behind, a battered ink-stained note, hung heavily in the air between them. "Keep your Apache witch or lose everything," Cole read aloud, voice low but resolute. The words stung like barbs, but they also steeled his spirit. "They want to break us." Nara's lips pressed into a thin line. "They forget what it means to survive the desert," she said quietly. "We bend but do not break." Together, they turned from the smoldering wreckage to the house, rebuilt with stubborn hands and a shared purpose. Their resolve was forged in fire. The destruction only deepened their bond, no longer protector and protected, but a unified front against the encroaching hatred. Days melted into nights, spent planning defenses, tending wounds, and exchanging silences heavy with unspoken fears and fledgling hopes. Cole found himself watching Nara more than he admitted. The way her hands moved as she repaired battered fences, the quiet strength in her back as she lifted heavy beams. In turn, Nara glimpsed the cracks beneath Cole's mountain of pride, the man wrestling with his own demons, desperate to hold on to something true amid the shifting sands of this frontier. Their shared language became one of glances and small gestures. A touch on an arm here, a hand steadying another there. Silent promises wrapped in sweat and dirt. The old rites and symbols from Nara's culture, amulets tied in knotwork, patterns drawn in dust, began to weave themselves into the ranch's daily rhythm, bridging worlds once thought too distant. But beneath these moments of fragile peace, the venom of prejudice festered and coiled. News had already begun to spread like wildfire beyond the neighboring towns. The powers that ruled with whispered threats and silent daggers had taken notice, and they were mobilizing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in molten gold, Cole rode out to meet the emissaries, a small group of grim-faced men, led by a well-dressed figure his eyes immediately recognized. Jasper Merrick, one of the wealthiest and most influential landowners in the region. His smile was thin, predatory. "Mr. Stanton," Jasper began, voice smooth yet laced with cold menace, "this arrangement you keep with the Apache woman is a thorn in the side of our community. We've tolerated it longer than expected." His gaze flicked to Nara, standing beside Cole, unyielding as the evening sky. "She must leave, now, or you will find your business diminished, your name sullied." Cole's jaw tightened. "Nara is under my protection. This land is mine to decide, not yours to threaten." Jasper's smile sharpened. "Consider this your final warning." Daylight waned, leaving a burnished glow over the ranch, a fragile veil over simmering tension. The emissary's departure was a storm passing, momentarily, but the threat lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Inside the house, Nara and Cole stood side by side, the weight of oppression pressing hard against their backs. "They want to isolate her," Nara said, voice low, "to make her a target, and me an outlaw by association." "And the town will listen if I falter," Cole answered, his voice both a barrel and a bell, warning and call to arms. The walls of Cole's home no longer felt like refuge, but a front line. The fence lines transformed into borders between worlds at war, not just with each other, but with deeply ingrained fear and ignorance. Over the following days, whispers turned to cold shoulders. Old friends became distant strangers. Neighbors who once offered nods and waves now watched with narrowed eyes. The ranch was a crucible of isolation, testing their mettle in silence. Each fleeting moment of shared breath was a corrosion of old allegiances and a forging of new strength. Yet even as opposition mounted, Nara's courage became a beacon. When she spoke to local women, her calm voice and steely resolve captured attention beyond the walls of prejudice. Some found themselves questioning long-held biases, uncertain whether the line drawn in the dust was truly unbridgeable. One somber night, as the wind howled through the sagebrush, a crackling fire was lit, this one born not of destruction, but of defiance. Cole and Nara sat near the flickering flames, their silhouettes outlined in amber. "We are not alone," Cole murmured. "Nor will we be if we stand together." Nara nodded, a faint smile breaking through the usual stoicism. "Strength is not in ruling others," she whispered, "but in standing firm when the world wants you to fall." But the fragile truce between hope and despair was about to shatter. Shadows lengthened as word spread that Graves, the relentless hunter whose presence haunted their flight, had returned. This time he was no lone pursuer, but led a grim party, armed and ready to claim his prize with cold finality. Late one dusky afternoon, as the wind shifted and the first stars blinked hesitantly to life, distant hoofbeats thundered across the plain, a dark herald of violence hurtling toward the ranch. Cole's eyes narrowed, his mouth tightening to a thin line. Nara's breath caught, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The air thickened, the moment stretching taut like a coiled bowstring. Their gazes locked, words unnecessary, the unbreakable pact between them forged anew in the gathering storm. From beyond the hills, the brutal force was advancing. Graves and his armed band, resolute and merciless, riding to drag Nara back into a world that had never welcomed her. And as the first embers of violence ignited on the horizon, the fragile sanctuary they'd built stood on the precipice of a tempest that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and survival in the unforgiving Wild West. The early dawn broke over the ranch, casting a pale light on the smoldering remains of the stable, the heavy scent of charred wood still lurking in the cool morning air. Cole Stanton stood with his jaw set, eyes scanning the devastation, his land, his sanctuary, scarred by flames meant to fracture their fragile peace. Beside him, Nara's presence was a steady flame against the bitter chill, her gaze unwavering as the ash settled. "We fought shadows before," Nara said, softly, voice a quiet steel. "These fires won't burn what we've built inside ourselves." Cole's fingers clenched into fists, the folded note from the past night's threat crushed silently in his palm. "They want to break us down, to scatter what little hope remains. But they forget, hope is a stubborn root. In the stillness, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down. The agents of fear, led by Graves, returning like a storm, surged on the horizon. But Cole and Nara were no longer two isolated souls caught between worlds. They had become the shield and the spear of something greater. The ranch stirred cautiously. Cowboys and outlanders who had slowly warmed to Nara's strength came out from their shadows, stepping forward with determination rather than distrust. The air thrummed with a pulse, the union of spirits forged in fire, pain, and perseverance. As twilight deepened into night, the distant thunder of horse hooves fractured the fragile calm. Graves and his armed band closed in, relentless and ruthless, their eyes cold with a hunger twisted by greed and hatred. Cole mounted first, his broad shoulders squared in defiance. Nara followed, poised and focused, her hands steady on the reins. Between them, the silence spoke of unbreakable bonds and shared fate. The battle unfolded beneath a blood-red sky, the ranch turning into a crucible where the line between freedom and destruction was fiercely contested. Nara moved with the silent precision of her ancestors, every gesture a story of survival. She rallied allies with sharp commands, her spirit igniting courage in those who had once only watched with wary eyes. Cole's gunfire cut through the night like thunder, not just defending a woman or land, but a vision unyielding in its demand for peace and respect. Around them, the sounds of struggle mingled with cries of defiance and pain. In the heart of the fight, Cole found himself face to face with Graves, the hunter's sneer fading beneath the glare of a man fighting for more than vengeance. Blow by blow, they clashed, not just with weapons, but with the weight of histories and choices that stretched beyond the dusty plains. Meanwhile, Nara confronted the dark heart of the threat, standing tall as both warrior and symbol. Her words, fierce and clear even amid chaos, rallied their makeshift community. We do not vanish like shadows. We remain, stronger, united. As the dawn's first light crept over bleeding hills, the attackers faltered. Graves, battered and captured, was bound and brought before the weary victors. His defeat was a bitter victory, tempered by the cost. A few brave souls lost, the land bearing wounds echoed in ragged breaths. In the quiet aftermath, an elder from Nara's people arrived, moving with solemn grace. His eyes, deep with a lifetime of pain and wisdom, softened as they rested on the sprawling ranch, now a ground of both memory and promise. The past carries its weight, he said, voice echoing centuries of endurance. But so too does the present hold, a chance for new paths. With his blessing, Cole embraced a vision beyond his own solitude. The creation of a community where cultures could intertwine without fear, where Nara was not a shadow to hide, but a beacon to honor. She took her place at his side, no longer merely the protected, but a partner, a force shaping destiny. Together, they walked through the tall grass, a horizon spreading wide before them, alive with the dawn of uncertain but hopeful tomorrows. The land around them whispered ancient secrets and newfound songs, weaving the threads of broken pasts into a tapestry of resilience. Cole squeezed must remain. Nara smiled, a rare softness illuminating her fierce spirit. Together, she said, we will root deep and stand tall. The frontier has room for those who dare to embrace each other's truths. The sun rose fully, burning away shadows and fear. For a moment, the Wild West was not a land of exile, but a testament to love, courage, and transformation. And as the wind carried their story forward, it whispered through the prairie grasses, that even amidst hardship, the human heart could forge a home. The saga ended not with silence, but with a promise. The promise of new beginnings, resistant and radiant, carved into the endless plains by hands joined across the divide. A legacy of hope born from fire and fortitude.